I wasn't expecting the letter. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, and when I saw the lawyer's name on the envelope, I had no idea what to think. My hands shook a little as I tore it open, the words inside sinking into my chest like stones. You have inherited the property of your late grandfather, William Thompson. The letter went on to explain the details, but that's all I really read. My grandfather? I hadn't seen him in years. He passed away quietly, I'd heard, but it didn't prepare me for this. His land, the land that had been in our family for generations, was now mine. I drove there the next morning. The place was familiar, and yet, unfamiliar. It didn't feel like it had been empty all these years, but rather, as if my grandfather had just stepped out for a minute and would be back any second. I parked near the entrance and stepped out of the car, taking in the smell of the earth, the thick trees, and the overgrown grass. The barn was still standing, its wood weathered and creaking. As I walked toward it, memories flooded back, running through these fields as a kid, my brother and me playing hide and seek in the tall grass, my grandfather sitting on the porch, that soft chuckle I could still hear in my head. I made my way down the old, cracked path toward the pond. The water glistened in the morning sun, and for a moment, I almost felt like nothing had changed. But then, as I rounded the corner, my heart dropped into my stomach. A large section of the property was fenced off. Huge, metal fences that had been put up recently. And behind them, construction. Bulldozers, cranes, and a crew of workers, all busy at work. I stood frozen for a moment, watching in disbelief. What the hell was going on? My mind raced as I walked toward the workers. A man with a hard hat looked up at me, his expression blank. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's happening here?" He wiped his forehead and glanced at the other workers before answering. "We've got clearance from the HOA to develop this area. You know, for commercial use. It's been in the plans for a while now." My blood ran cold. "The HOA? You have permission to build on my land?" I stepped forward, feeling a rush of panic. "I didn't give any permission. This is my grandfather's land. It's been in the family for generations." The man shrugged. "Not my call, buddy. HOA approved it. Talk to them if you've got a problem." I stood there, staring at the construction, unable to comprehend what was happening. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. I was standing on the land I had inherited, but someone else, someone I'd never even met, had already taken control of it. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something else, something much worse. And the fact that it was happening without my knowledge, without any consent, it didn't sit right. I didn't know what to do next, but I was sure of one thing: I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. I wasn't prepared for Sharon Buckley. I didn't know who she was at first, just another figure in the HOA, but when she walked up to me on my property, her presence hit me like a storm. She had this confidence, this air about her, like she had the world in her pocket. When she introduced herself as the president of the HOA, I almost didn't believe her. But her smug smile, the way she carried herself, made it clear she thought she was untouchable. She wasn't here to ask questions. No, she was here to lay down the law. "You're trespassing," she said, holding a clipboard in front of me like it was some kind of shield. "I've been informed you're interfering with our community development plans." I was already on edge, but hearing her say that, seeing how she didn't even blink while claiming authority over land that was mine, something snapped inside me. "I'm not interfering. This is my land. You don't get to tell me what to do with it." She didn't flinch, didn't even seem surprised by my anger. Instead, she handed me a thick stack of papers. "This is a formal notice. You've violated community standards, and the developers are moving forward. Your land's already been designated for commercial use." My mind went blank for a moment, and I stared at the papers, unable to process the words. Commercial use? You're taking my land? Without even talking to me? The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they had to come out. Who authorized this? Sharon's smirk deepened. The HOA. I've got the backing of some very powerful developers. It's already a done deal. Her tone was as casual as if she were talking about a lawnmower upgrade, not the illegal takeover of my family's property. You can fight it if you want, but it won't do any good. The plans are moving forward. You're just delaying the inevitable. I felt the rage bubbling up inside me, boiling over. You can't just steal someone's land because you have backing, because you know the right people. I was shaking now, my words coming out faster than I could think. My family's worked this land for generations. You can't erase that. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing as if she was savoring the moment. I'm not erasing anything. You're free to keep your property, if you don't mind the bulldozers working around you. We'll be doing what's best for the community, and your little farm here, well, it's just not part of the plan anymore. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those memories, all that history, were being wiped away in an instant. You're making a huge mistake, I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't change anything. She just smiled again, the kind of smile you give to a dog when you know it's too weak to bite. I don't think so. But good luck, anyway. You'll need it. She turned to walk away, the sound of her shoes clicking against the dirt making it all too real. I stood there, watching her disappear, feeling a hollow pit in my stomach. This wasn't just about land. It was about my family's legacy. And now, it was being threatened by a woman who saw it all as just another project. I had to do something, but what? The silence of the house felt suffocating as I sat at my grandfather's old desk, surrounded by piles of paperwork. I'd hoped the answer would jump out at me, the key document that would prove this land was mine, that I had the right to protect it. But so far, it felt like I was drowning in dusty old files, my grandfather's handwriting scrawled across them in a language I couldn't understand. I shifted through land surveys, old maps, and tax receipts, hoping for something that would put me on solid ground. And then, I found it. It was a thick envelope tucked away in a drawer that barely closed. My heart raced as I pulled it out, but when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. The papers inside were dated years ago, but the land survey seemed off. There was a new boundary line marked on the map, one that wasn't on any of the other documents. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. The new line cut into the property, taking a chunk of land I'd always known was ours. I flipped through the documents, my fingers shaking. That's when I found the signatures. They were all wrong. Some didn't even match my grandfather's handwriting. There were names I didn't recognize, and the date on one of the documents, about the supposed change in boundaries, was dated 2 months before my grandfather had even passed away. My stomach sank. This was no mistake. This was fraud. I kept digging, my mind racing as I uncovered more permits, contracts, and official-looking forms that had been tampered with. Every page I turned made my blood boil. The developers had worked fast, but they'd been careful. They'd forged signatures, altered legal documents, and snuck through the cracks, manipulating the system. They'd stolen the land with a pen. I slammed the last of the papers back onto the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. This was deliberate. They had been planning this for years, and now they were executing it. My family's land, everything I had believed was safely ours, was slipping away into the hands of corrupt developers. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the room, but I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't let them win. I had to fight. My family had built everything from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let it be erased by a few forged signatures and some shady deals. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of a lawyer I'd found online, one who specialized in property rights and land disputes. I needed someone who could help me make sense of all this. When I met with the lawyer, he didn't waste any time. He looked at the documents, his brows furrowed in disbelief. "This is definitely fraud," he said after a long silence. "The signatures are forged, and the land records are altered. You have a strong case, but it's going to be a tough battle. You'll need to prepare yourself for a long fight." The fight had officially begun. I wasn't just going to stand by and let them take my family's legacy. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. This was personal, and I was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done. The first threatening letter arrived on a Monday. It was signed by Sharon Buckley, of course, and it claimed that I was in violation of multiple HOA regulations, threatening a fine if I didn't comply. It didn't make sense. I hadn't done anything wrong. But as the days passed, the letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. They demanded I vacate the property, threatening legal action if I didn't comply. I hadn't even started the legal battle yet, and already, Sharon's tactics were getting under my skin. The real harassment began a week later when Sharon sent an official inspector to my property. The guy showed up with a clipboard, wearing a wrinkled shirt, and looked like he had no idea what he was doing. He walked around, taking photos of everything, acting like he was documenting violations, but when I tried to ask him what he was doing, he just ignored me and kept moving. I knew it was all part of Sharon's plan to intimidate me, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. "You're wasting your time," I said to him, watching him snap photos of the barn. "There's nothing wrong here." He just shrugged and kept clicking away, muttering something about community standards. It was like the world was turning against me. The workers who had once been willing to help me with small repairs and farm tasks started avoiding me. One of them, a guy named Mark who'd been a friend of my grandfather's, pulled me aside one day. "I can't work for you anymore," he said quietly, looking over his shoulder. "Sharon's been threatening people who help you. She's got a lot of power in this town." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Sharon was winning, and I could feel the walls closing in. I tried to keep my head up, but the stress was getting to me. Sleep was a stranger, and every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the sound of bulldozers in the distance, tearing into what was rightfully mine. I couldn't give up, not now. But the weight of it all was starting to break me. The constant pressure, the looming threat of losing everything my family had built, sometimes, it felt like I was fighting an impossible battle. But every time I thought about giving in, about throwing in the towel, I thought about my grandfather. I thought about his hands on the farm, his voice telling me about how hard they fought to keep this land. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let Sharon erase all that history. The worst part was the divide in the community. Some of the neighbors, the ones who were too scared of Sharon's influence, started turning their backs on me. They stopped saying hello when I walked past, and I could hear the whispers behind my back. But there were others, a few brave souls who came to me quietly, offering their support. Some even shared stories about how Sharon had bullied them, too, but they were too scared to speak out. Slowly, I started to realize who I could trust, and it made me feel less alone in this fight. But it didn't make it any easier. Sharon's smugness only grew. Every time I saw her, she acted like she had already won. Her smirk was all I could see, a reminder that the corruption I was fighting against ran deeper than I realized. The stakes were higher now, and I couldn't turn back. I just had to hold on long enough to prove the truth. I never thought I'd find myself sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at a stack of papers I could barely make sense of. But here I was. The weight of everything I had to prove was sitting on my shoulders, and I wasn't sure where to start. But I couldn't stop now. Not when everything my grandfather built was at risk. The lawyer's name was Dana Monroe. She was sharp, confident, and seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. She wasn't surprised by Sharon's tactics, not in the slightest. "This is a classic case of land fraud," she said, flipping through the documents I'd gathered. "And based on what you've shown me, it looks like Sharon has a lot more to answer for." I nodded, trying to focus. "I've got to stop her. She's already taking control of the land with forged papers." Dana raised an eyebrow. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this won't be easy. We're going to need solid evidence, and that's where we come in. I'm bringing in someone who specializes in fraud investigations. We need to track down every bit of history on your grandfather's property and see where the corruption starts." That's when I met Marcus, the private investigator Dana brought in. At first, I wasn't sure about trusting him. He was quiet, almost too quiet, and had a way of slipping in and out of rooms like he was always thinking 10 steps ahead. But when he showed me the first few pieces of evidence he'd dug up, I started to see a different side of the story. "The permit's here?" Marcus said, pulling up a copy of one of the documents I'd found. "This isn't your grandfather's signature. And this survey, it's a fake." He pointed to a map with red circles, marking the new boundaries they'd set for the property. "These land surveys don't match any of the original ones. Someone's been doctoring the records." I stared at the evidence, my heart sinking. I thought Sharon was bad, but this was worse than I ever imagined. The web of corruption was spreading far beyond her, and I had no idea how deep it really went. Bribes, falsified documents, and officials willing to turn a blind eye, it was all there in black and white. My mind raced as I absorbed everything Marcus showed me. "How did they get away with this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Connections," Marcus answered, his tone grim. "Sharon's not acting alone. She's got people in her corner, people who will do anything to protect their own interests." I felt a pit in my stomach. For a moment, it felt like everything was stacked against me. But then Dana spoke up. "You're not alone in this. We're not just fighting for the land, we're fighting for justice. And for your family's legacy. These people think they can intimidate you into backing down. But they're wrong." That's when I realized how much I'd been carrying on my own. At first, I was hesitant to trust anyone. But as the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for my family, for the history that had been built on this soil, and for the community that had been betrayed. It wasn't just about winning the land back, it was about making sure people like Sharon couldn't continue to manipulate the system for their own gain. And I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. The community meeting felt like a trap the moment I walked in. The room was full, but there was no warmth, no support, just cold stares from people who had chosen to remain silent for far too long. Sharon was sitting at the front, her smug face almost daring me to challenge her. She had the entire HOA board behind her, and from the looks of it, they were all in on it. I walked to the front of the room, my hand shaking as I placed the stack of documents on the table in front of Sharon. "You've been lying to everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You forged documents. You bribed people. You've stolen my family's land." Sharon raised an eyebrow, her smile never wavering. "What are you talking about? You've got nothing but lies." She waved a hand dismissively, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "These are just accusations. You can't prove any of it." I didn't back down. I slapped a few of the forged documents on the table, leaning forward. "This says otherwise. This is the truth, Sharon. You've been manipulating everyone, sweeping everything under the rug with your connections. But I won't let you get away with it." Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she straightened up in her chair, putting on her best poker face. "You think this is going to work? You think these papers, this little performance of yours, will make a difference? You're out of your depth. You've always been out of your depth." I felt the anger building in my chest. The frustration, the helplessness, it all surged to the surface. You don't get to decide what's right. You've spent your entire life hiding behind your power, using people like me for your own gain. This isn't just about land, Sharon. This is about right and wrong. And you're on the wrong side of it. I could feel the tears welling up, the lump in my throat choking me. The weight of everything, the land, my family, the years of hard work, pressed down on me, and I could feel it all slipping through my fingers. But I couldn't let her see how badly she was getting to me. I took a deep breath and pushed forward. Sharon's face twisted into a sneer. This isn't a court of law, Wade. These are just community members. You're wasting everyone's time. That was it. The floodgates opened, and I lost control. You're stealing everything I've worked for, everything my family built. You've lied and cheated your way through this whole thing. And now you're going to stand here and pretend like you've done nothing wrong? I won't let you take what's mine. The room went silent. Sharon's expression faltered again, and for the briefest moment, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. But she quickly recovered, throwing her weight around again. You have no idea what you're up against, Wade. You can't win this. Something shifted inside me then. I wasn't going to be afraid anymore. She didn't control this room. She didn't control me. You've underestimated me, Sharon, I said, my voice low and steady now. And that's going to be your biggest mistake. I turned and walked out of the meeting room, my heart pounding in my chest. My legs felt like they might give way under me, but I stood tall. The fight wasn't over, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for everything my family had worked for, and I wasn't about to let Sharon, or anyone else, take it away. I stood at the front of the room, the hum of whispers surrounding me. People were filling the seats, not knowing what was about to happen. But I did. I had everything I needed, the forged documents, the bribes, the letters of support from neighbors who were finally willing to speak up. This was it. The moment I'd been working toward. Sharon's empire of lies was about to come crashing down. I laid the first stack of documents on the table, my hands steady despite the weight of everything. These are the papers Sharon's been hiding. These are the forged land surveys and the contracts she's been using to steal property from people in this community. The room went quiet. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, their skepticism hanging in the air like a thick fog. Sharon was sitting in the front, her arms crossed, trying to maintain her usual smug composure. But I could see her body stiffen as I spoke. This document, I continued, pointing to one of the forgeries, was signed by a fake surveyor. The signatures were forged. And that's not all. I've got records here showing how Sharon bribed local officials to look the other way while she pushed through these illegal developments. I heard a murmur from the back of the room, and when I looked up, I saw people exchanging glances, some of them starting to nod. It was happening. People were starting to believe me. One of my neighbors, Greg, stood up. That's right, he said, his voice shaking a little. Sharon's been bullying everyone. She's fined people for the stupidest reasons, and if you don't go along with her, she makes your life hell. She's been running this HOA like it's her own little kingdom. Another neighbor, Emily, stood up next. She tried to fine me for planting wildflowers in my yard because they weren't approved. It's not just the land, it's everything. She's been doing this for years. Each word they spoke was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The community was rallying behind me. I wasn't just fighting for my family's land, I was fighting for everyone who'd been silenced by Sharon's reign of terror. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, but it wasn't just physical. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the never-ending fight, I could feel it all crashing into me at once. But there was something else rising in me, too. Hope. A belief in the justice I was fighting for. I wasn't just winning a legal battle. I was reclaiming what was rightfully ours. Then, Sharon stood up, her face red with anger. "This is all lies," she shouted. "You're all being manipulated. This is a smear campaign. You have no proof of any of this." But as she spoke, I saw her confidence begin to crack. Her voice wavered, and the room was no longer on her side. She was trying to regain control, but the truth was slipping through her fingers like sand. "I've got the proof, Sharon," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've manipulated this entire community for years. But not anymore." The truth was out, and Sharon's lies were unraveling in front of everyone. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. The fight wasn't over, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she faced the consequences of her actions. And I was going to make sure she did. The courtroom felt suffocating. I couldn't stop the sweat that beaded on my forehead as I sat there, surrounded by Sharon's well-dressed legal team, each of them armed with their fancy suits and smug expressions. I was outmatched in every way. They had money, connections, and power. All I had was the truth, and a handful of documents I could barely comprehend, let alone present as evidence. But I couldn't back down now. I tried to keep my hands steady as I passed the evidence to my lawyer, Dana. She gave me a reassuring nod, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the same weight I felt pressing down on me. I had no idea how I was going to survive this. Sharon's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with cold eyes, stood up to speak first. "Your Honor, this case is a clear example of a person refusing to accept change. The defendant claims that the land was wrongly taken, but we have all the proper documents, signatures, and approvals to back up our development." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sharon was still trying to spin this as though everything was perfectly legal. I could feel my blood boiling. I couldn't let her get away with it. Dana stood up, her voice strong. "Your Honor, we have irrefutable evidence that these documents were forged. The signatures do not match the legitimate records, and the permits were obtained under false pretenses, with bribes paid to local officials to look the other way. We have witnesses who are willing to testify to this, including several community members who were intimidated into silence by the plaintiff." The room went silent as we presented the evidence, the forged land surveys, the bribery records, and the testimony from the neighbors who were finally coming forward. One by one, they spoke about Sharon's reign of terror, the fines, the manipulation, and the pressure to comply with her will. Each word they spoke felt like a small victory. It was like the truth was finally coming to light. But even with the evidence, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The pressure was overwhelming. Every time I looked over at Sharon, her icy stare seemed to pierce through me. She wasn't scared. She was confident, like she knew the fix was in. I wanted to give up so many times during that trial. The stress was taking its toll, my mind kept racing, my chest tight. There were moments when I questioned whether any of this would matter. But then I thought about my grandfather, about the land he'd worked for his whole life, and about the legacy I had to protect. I couldn't give up. Not when so many people had suffered because of Sharon's greed. The judge called for a recess, and for a few moments, I allowed myself to breathe. When the court reconvened, Dana stood tall, presenting our final piece of evidence, a recording of Sharon's own voice, caught on tape, admitting to the bribes and the manipulation. It was the smoking gun we needed. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. The court finds in favor of the defendant. The development is invalid, and all parties involved in the fraudulent activities will face consequences. The weight I'd been carrying for so long finally lifted, and I could feel a wave of relief wash over me. Sharon and her team were stunned, their faces drained of color. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Justice had been served. I turned to Dana, and for the first time since this all began, I smiled. We did it. I stood on the land, the ground beneath my feet feeling more solid than it ever had before. It wasn't just the soil or the grass, it was everything I'd fought for, the memories, the history, the legacy that was now truly mine again. Sharon's developers were long gone, the legal battles and the courtroom drama were finally behind me, but the weight of it all still hung in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a threshold, one that had taken everything from me but had also given me something far more important. I looked out at the property, the barn that had once seemed so distant now standing strong. The pond where I'd spent so many hours as a kid, where I had found solace, now felt like a symbol of everything I'd won back. It had been an uphill battle, no question. There were times I thought I wouldn't make it. Times I thought I'd lose everything. But here I was, still standing. You did it. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts. She was standing at the edge of the field, a soft smile on her face as she walked toward me. Yeah, I said, my voice low. I can't believe it's over. Well, it's not completely over yet, she said, her tone light but firm. There's still work to do. We're not just keeping this land safe for you, we're protecting everyone who's been hurt by Sharon and her cronies. I smiled. The community, the very people who had distanced themselves from me in the beginning, were now rallying together. One by one, the neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out were coming to me with apologies. I didn't know what to believe, Greg admitted one afternoon. But now that I see the truth, I'm with you. We all are. The support felt surreal, but it was also grounding. It wasn't just about the land anymore, it was about the people who had been manipulated, the families who had suffered in silence. And now, we were standing together, ready to rebuild. Standing there on the property, I felt different. I wasn't the person who walked into this fight with nothing but fear and doubt. I had changed, transformed, really. What had started as a personal battle for survival had grown into something bigger. It was no longer just about me or my family's land. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter how hard it was, no matter how much I had to lose. Looking out at the horizon, I could feel the weight of my grandfather's legacy more clearly now than ever before. I had never truly understood the value of what he built until I was at risk of losing it. And in the process of fighting for that legacy, I had come to understand something more profound: the fight for justice is never easy, but it's always worth it. The journey hadn't been easy, far from it. But in the end, I had learned the true power of persistence, the strength of community, and the importance of standing up for what's right. It wasn't just about keeping the land safe anymore. It was about ensuring that the future would never forget what we fought for. And as I looked around at the faces of those who stood with me, I knew we had all found something far more valuable than land. We had found our voice. As I stand here now, looking out at the land that I fought so hard to protect, I can't help but reflect on everything I've been through. It feels surreal. I remember the person I was when this all started, uncertain, hesitant, constantly second-guessing myself. I was terrified of what might happen, unsure of how I could possibly take on someone like Sharon, let alone win. But now, looking at what I've accomplished, I realize how much I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. I've fought through the fear, through the doubt, and I've come out the other side stronger. I didn't back down when it mattered most. I stood up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against me. And in doing so, I've become someone I'm proud of, someone who doesn't hesitate to fight for justice, no matter what. I've been thinking, Emily says as she stands next to me, her gaze fixed on the property. You've not only reclaimed your family's land, Wade, you've restored something even more important. Faith. Faith in the system. Faith in the community. I nod, taking in her words. It's true. The fight wasn't just about land. It was about proving that the legal system can work, that there are still good people out there willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about showing that we can rebuild, not just the land, but the trust that had been broken by Sharon and her corruption. As I think about the people who came forward to help me, those who had once been silent but now stood by me with courage, it hits me how much more this has become than just a personal battle. This is a victory for everyone who was too afraid to speak up, too intimidated to fight. It's a victory for my family, for the community, and for justice itself. The land is safe. My family's legacy is secure. And as I look out over the familiar fields and the old barn, I realize how much this has changed me. The fight I started was for survival, but what I've gained is so much more. I've reclaimed more than just land. I've reclaimed my own sense of purpose, my strength, and my connection to the values that matter most. This isn't the end, is it? Emily asks, breaking my thoughts. She's right. This journey was only the beginning. No, I answer quietly. It's just the beginning. I stand there for a moment longer, the weight of everything finally settling. The fight wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And I know now that no matter what comes next, I'm ready to face it. Because I've learned something through all of this. I've learned the power of persistence, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the strength that comes from never giving up. I'm no longer the man I was before. I'm someone stronger. Someone ready for whatever comes next.